All right, everybody, welcome to episode 20 of the Backseat Huddle podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tristan Weber. And today I only have two topics for you. So it's going to be a short-ish show. One of my topics, my first one, is going to be kind of a long-winded explanation about why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers aren't any good. And part of that is my favorite player, Tom Brady, is part of the issue there. And number two, I'll be talking to you guys about the Minnesota Vikings and their newest ridiculous comeback against the Indianapolis Colts, and I'll share my thoughts on that for you. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so to start my show off, unfortunately, I'm going to talk about my favorite player and the team that I root for week in and week out. I'm going to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They aren't good. And I keep hearing about how Tom Brady should have stayed retired. And that's based on the way this season has gone. That's probably correct. And that he's washed up, which is incorrect. The Buccaneers, as previously mentioned, they just aren't good. They aren't. But I would like to take some time to tell you why. And once again, despite being a massive Tom Brady fan, I do have to admit he is part of the problem, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later. I'd like to give an in-depth explanation of why, in my opinion, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers aren't good this season. And in my opinion, there's four main issues. Number one, and most predominantly, the offensive coaching on this team stinks. This team stinks offensively as far as coaching is concerned. And I'd like to put it in a nutshell for you, starting at the top with head coach Todd Bowles. Here's an example. About a month ago, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers lost a game in overtime to the Cleveland Browns. And I'm sure you all remember it. The Browns scored a game-tying field goal with 32 seconds left on the clock. The Buccaneers had 3 timeouts left, and they did not use a single one of those timeouts until they had 8 seconds left on the clock. That is awful time management. They did gain yards. They were only about 10 to 15 yards away from the field goal line when they used that one timeout. So they were gaining yards. But that's not really that big of the issue for me. The issue for me is what head coach Todd Bowles said after the game. And this is a quote. He was asked why they didn't use the timeouts when they could have had more time left. This is what Todd Bowles said. He said, "We could have had an interception as well." Then went on to ramble about how they didn't get enough yards on first down and whatever. He was worried about throwing an interception. You have Tom Brady as your quarterback, arguably the most clutch player in NFL history, and you're worried about throwing an interception? In a nutshell, just think about that for a second. Does that sound like someone who's a good NFL head coach? Does that sound like the thought process you would want your NFL head coach with Tom Brady as your quarterback to have? And it's made even worse by the fact that 2 weeks prior to that game, Tom Brady led a game-winning touchdown drive. In the game against the Browns, they needed a field goal to win it. He led a touchdown drive with 44 seconds left and 0 timeouts against the Rams. Now, that happened a month ago, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it. Let's talk a little bit more recently. Let's talk about the offensive coordinator, Byron Leftwich. He's just not good. And he does things schematically that don't make any sense. Let's listen to a clip, okay, from this most recent game. Let's listen to what Tony Romo says. And I apologize to my audio-only listeners for this, but let's listen to this clip of what Tony Romo says.
They got their butts kicked last week by the 49ers. And right there, you're like, this is what it takes. Sometimes when you get really a game, you just get destroyed. You really got to go and say, we need to change now. You can't just kind of try and win the game. It's like we got to fundamentally change what we're doing. They just motioned for just a simple run there on the move, the fullback. They don't do that. That was really good. Now they got an extra O-lineman in the game.
Don't have to snap.
So there's two things to break down here, okay? He says that, quote, sometimes it takes getting your butt kicked to fundamentally change what you do. Why did it take that for the Tampa Bay offense to change what they do? They were averaging 17 points per game, which was good for 27th in the league. So for 13 weeks, up until you got blown out by the San Francisco offense, you felt it was okay to be one of the 5th worst scoring offenses in the NFL? You just thought, hey, you know what? It's going to take us losing by 30 whatever points to the San Francisco 49ers to change what you do. That's not rational. What you were doing up to that point wasn't working. So why didn't you change it so it did start working? That's not rational. And here's the part that really bothered me is he said this. This might have bothered me worse than it bothered you, but this bothered me. He said, they did a motion for a simple run play. They haven't done that. That was good. You mean like every other team in the NFL is doing? Like every single other successful offense is doing? It took you 13 weeks to finally integrate that into your offense? It's silly. It's just bad coaching. If everybody else is doing it and you aren't, something's wrong with you. We hear this all the time. It's a copycat league. So if it works, do it. It was working and they weren't doing it. And if you think that I'm done roasting this coaching staff, you're wrong. So if you're tired of hearing me hear about it, you can just jump to the next topic. The timestamp is in the description. I'll put it in there for you. But I'm not done because I've been holding this shit in for 3 months and I need to get this out. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about how bad this offensive coaching staff is, okay? The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are one of the best play action teams in the NFL, but they absolutely refuse to use it. I'm going to read this tweet to you from Paul Atwall. And Mr. Atwall, if you see this, I apologize if I said your name wrong. Okay. In the game against the Bengals, the Buccaneers had a season high in play action pass attempts at 14, which sounds like it might be a lot. But with that information in mind, please understand that right now, Tom Brady is on pace to break the record for most pass attempts in a season. So 14 play action attempts isn't a lot. So here's the tweet. On their 14 play action passes, they were 10 of 14 for 145 yards. That is 30% of their dropbacks, their second highest rate of the year. If that were their rate for the whole season, Brady would rank 9th of 39 qualifying quarterbacks in play action usage. Instead, he's 38th. If it works, they aren't doing it. Now, let's move on to the motion that I talked about earlier and how they're once again not doing it despite it working. Well, they did have some motion this game, and I'm going to read this other tweet from Jenna Lane from ESPN. So thank you for both of you too for this information I'm regurgitating on my show. Here's the tweet. The Bucs used motion for a season-high 27 plays in the first half. Tom Brady was 11 of 14 for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns on those. Second half, 13 plays of motion. Brady, 4 of 8 for 38, passing another touchdown. Less efficient in the second half. But why not stick to it? Great question, Jenna. Maybe you should be calling plays for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because at least you can see what works. The offensive coaching for this staff, this team, doesn't make any sense for the Buccaneers. And I haven't even talked about how predictably they run the ball up the middle every single first down over and over again, because I think you guys get it at this point, which does bring me to that second point. Second, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers don't run the ball well at all. Absolute zero effectiveness. For roughly the first 10 weeks of the NFL season, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were on pace to be one of, if not the worst rushing offense in NFL history, averaging just over 50 yards per game. They have gotten better. However, only slightly. At this moment, they are ranked 32nd in the NFL in rushing offense. And here's another fun fact about the Buccaneers rushing game from Greg Allman. We've written about how Tom Brady's passing touchdowns are down. 43 last year, 20, on pace for 24 this year. But Bucs rushing touchdowns have disappeared. They had 18 last year, and they have 4 in 2020. 1 in the last 6 games. Matches the 1977 Bucs for fewest in any season. So they can't run the ball either. Is that Tom Brady's fault? No. That's why he's on pace to set the record for most pass attempts in a season. Third, the Tampa Bay offensive line play isn't good either. Their left tackle, Donovan Smith, is the most penalized player in the NFL this season, and he has fallen dramatically in Pro Football Focus's rankings. He was ranked 13th last season. This season, he has fallen to 70th of 77 qualifying tackles. That is really bad. And here's another snippet about their offensive line, courtesy of RG3. The interior of the Buccaneers, the interior offensive line for the Buccaneers has the 5th worst pass block win rate in the NFL with a quarterback who isn't fleet-footed. That's why the Bucs offense seems to be lost at sea. So their offensive line can't create holes for the running backs, or their running backs aren't any good, and they can't pass block for Tom Brady either. That's reason number 3. Lastly, reason number 4. Tom Brady. We got to call it how it is. It's a team game. He's missed some throws this season. More than he should have. He's missed some wide open targets down the field. He's missed some open targets down the field. He's just missed. I have watched him this season. I've watched a lot of Tom Brady in my career, or in my time. I've watched him miss players short, miss players low, miss players this way, miss players that way. He has to be held accountable for this team's, at least in part, he has to be held accountable for this team's success or lack thereof. It's a team game, and he plays a role. If Tom Brady had made some of those throws or hit some of those players, they may have a better record, and they may very probably have won more games. He's a part of the issue as well. I just don't think he's the major issue because they aren't doing well at any part, any facet of the offense outside of Tom Brady. So, in my opinion, what is going on for Tom Brady is that he's pressing. He knows that if he doesn't make those throws, effectively, that's probably the game-losing throw. That's a lot of pressure to have to put on one player. So that is my roughly 10-minute rant on why the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just aren't any good. Here's my second topic, which is significantly shorter. The Minnesota Vikings have completed the greatest comeback in NFL history this week, coming from down 33 points at halftime against the Indianapolis Colts. And I don't care. I don't care about the Minnesota Vikings. That was really impressive and it was really cool, but they're still fraudulent. I'm not going to give the Vikings any praise for being down 33 points against a team that has a head coach with no head coaching experience at any level, a quarterback who has blown large leads in the past, a team that has a 4-9-1 record. Why am I supposed to give the Minnesota Vikings credit for giving up 7 sacks, turning the ball over 3 times, and giving up 170 rushing yards against the Colts, who didn't have Jonathan Taylor? I'm not impressed by this. I'm not. You shouldn't have been down in the first place. Look, the Vikings deserve credit for being the type of team that has the fight and the will to combat this despite being down so many points. You deserve the credit for beating the Colts, a team you should have beaten anyway. Why am I going to praise the Minnesota Vikings for doing something they should have done in a completely different fashion? You beat the Vikings. The Vikings beat a team that had less than half their win total. It should have been the Vikings that were up 33-0 at halftime, not the other way around. The Minnesota Vikings comeback was that impressive. Why didn't they mount a comeback against the Philadelphia Eagles? Why didn't they come back versus the Dallas Cowboys? Why didn't they come back versus the Lions? The Minnesota Vikings are a team with a ridiculous amount of fight, and what they're doing has some level of impressiveness to it, but it is also extremely damning of who they are as a team. Why are they down this much anyway? It's silly. It is silly, okay? The Vikings are fraudulent, and I'm not going to hear that they aren't. They could be down 50-0, and it would not change my impression of the Minnesota Vikings. You shouldn't keep getting down week in and week out. You shouldn't be down that many points anyway. We don't care if you came back and won the game. So that's it. That's my show. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Take care, everybody.